So, Sage is going to give his review of Black Myth Wukong. Sage, what do you got to say about Black Myth Wukong? You just finished it this past Sunday, you did?
Yeah, I just finished it on Sunday, and then I finished it again today, actually. Um, so yeah, I've already run through the entire New Game Plus on here. Clocked in, I'd say, I went for 100% with this. Probably about 91 hours altogether to do like literally every single thing in the game. Um, Man, where to start with this? This came out just like 2 weeks ago here, and it's it's the kind of feeling I only get it a couple times a year, maybe a few more if I'm lucky, where I feel like I genuinely don't want to put the controller down. I've only This year there's only been one other time. That was Tales of Kinzera Zao that I felt that way. But this game, it just I was looking forward to it, but I didn't expect to love it to the degree that I did. Um, this at every turn is constantly giving you new things, new enemy types to work your way around, new bosses to work your way around. Almost like the bosses are a little bit of a puzzle element at times, kind of like a Souls game. But for all the comparisons that you could make to other games, I do think this manages to have a unique identity and stand alone really well. Did you get a chance to play any of this yourselves yet?
No, I have not. Been
Okay.
busy.
It's got one of the coolest intro sequences that I've seen in a game in a long time, maybe since God of War 3 came out. I mean, it is this absolutely fantastic mythological intro. And then the game outdoes that sequence by the end of it. There's things that completely, some games they'll tee up with a great opening sequence and then they'll fall off a little bit. I thought this just got better and more entertaining as it went along. Um, by the end of this whole thing, there's a big boss battle at the end that is like got to be one of like the all-time greatest moments in video games for me. This was yeah this It was just so many things. I mean, you have one weapon here, right? You stick to one weapon. And I've heard some people talk about it being a little, I don't know, repetitive maybe based on the fact that there's only this one weapon. For me, I really like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love like say something like Elden Ring where there's all these different builds and weapons and things to choose from. I like that you have just a single weapon here. That reminds me a little bit more of something like Sekiro or Bayonetta, where well, I guess Bayonetta you have some different weapon options, but still you have kind of a signature that you generally tend to stick with. And I love that it just you upgrade that and you get a whole host of other abilities surrounding that. But I think it's this great feeling of perfecting a single type of fighting style. And then just upgrading that and making that feel more impactful as it goes along. It's got that more light attack, heavy attack combo feel of something like God of War. But I think the game changer in this, and it's something that comes from the mythology itself, but it is the spirit transformation system. There have to be like 50, 60 different spirit transformations you get across this game that, I mean, you just turn into like most of the enemies that you fight. Some of them are just a super move. Some of them are you turn into them and you get to use like this full move set of like this boss and get to just run around with it for a limited amount of time. But it is such a to be able to turn into so many of the other things in the game and use these power sets. It's such an interesting, different thing like that. I can't think of another game that does this level. Like the closest thing is maybe Bayonetta, where you can turn into a couple of animals here and there. You have a few of those kinds of somewhat transformation type moves. But I feel like that is something that is just so fleshed out here, and it feels like so expansive. Yeah, the gameplay is. I found it top notch. I never got bored of it. I never got tired of it. There's there's different armor sets, there's different staffs that you get. These things all kind of change your attributes and kind of how you're dealing with things. Certain ones are better with dealing with different bosses. You also get curios, which are these things that you slot in, kind of change your defense and attack, and certain elemental buffs and debuffs, and again, ways that you can mess around with your build. There's quite a few of these too as well. You have your gourd, which is kind of it's a little bit similar to like a Dark Souls healing item where you have a limited number of uses, but you also get a whole bunch of different gourds, each with their own attributes, and then you get different drinks that you can put in them that also have their own attributes, and then you get soaks, which are things that you drop in there, yet again altering the attributes of what your gourd actually does, like what benefits you get from drinking from it. Um, yeah, I mean, constantly this game I feel like is throwing new stuff at you. It's honestly one of the most fresh feeling experiences I've had just in a thing in general. It's just I don't know. At every turn, it's just so imaginative and coming from me, I'm not super familiar with the Journey to the West story. I know details about it, but I'm not like super experienced with the whole thing. It's just something I know bits and pieces of. And I think, one drawback I could throw out there, and this might be the case for some people. It didn't really drag it down for me, but just throw it out there anyway. Uh, if you're not super familiar with Journey to the West, I could see some of the story being a little confusing because this is more like a sequel than an adaptation. It picks up like the opening sequence is like the end of the Journey to the West story, and you kind of play this tutorial sequence, and then it's like after Wukong, the figure, the actual like mythological figure has been turned to stone, and you are like a young monkey generations later, kind of following in his footsteps, trying to collect the relics of Wukong's essence across this world, and having to fight these different beings and these different biomes to get the pieces of Wukong back and maybe try and resurrect him. And I think there's a simple enough story there that you can follow it, whether you know the Fran or the mythology or not. But also clearly, if you are a fan or you're intimately familiar with the world and this mythology, I think this game is going to hit very differently based on that as well. Oh, are you
Oh, geez, I was muted.
muted? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you made it to 100%, right, with the game, right?
Yeah, I did make it to 100%.
Okay. And you talked about some of the difficulty there. I know that's a conversation with this game. So if you are a person who's maybe familiar with From Software games, Bloodborne, Dark Souls, things like that, maybe you won't find this game as challenging. I know you've played those games before. So how would you kind of describe that, the difficulty for that, for people who have played the From Software games and maybe people who aren't really fans of those games, have never played those games? Because you said a lot of the combat in this style is more closer, not to really Dark Souls or Bloodborne, Elden Ring, more like something like Bayonetta and God of War, I would say.
Yeah, I mean it's a mix of things. There's certain gameplay elements that are reminiscent of some of the Soul stuff, but I think the big thing here is a Dark Souls game punishes you a lot more. If you die in Dark Souls, you lose your currency. That's you use for leveling up to buy everything. Right, you lose this resource. Here, you die, you just go back to a checkpoint or a shrine that you respawn from. But like, you don't lose anything. You just maybe have to walk back to where you were. Ultimately, the game is just a lot more forgiving. You're not losing resources. Dark Souls games will sometimes they'll get like harder if you die, like punish you based on not doing well and make it even more difficult for you. Um, this I think the difficulty comes in certain boss fights, but I'd say also just in and also not necessarily exploring as much. Every time there was something that was challenging in this game, certain end of area boss fights, every time something like that came up, I was able to go find something in the environment or from like a secret area that was very much able to balance things back out and make it a little more easy for me again. There was not a single time in the game where I felt like I was only getting by on skill, except for there's a tiger boss in chapter two, kind of early on. That one felt like a skill check. But I don't know. Once I got past that, like there were bosses that I would consider to be much harder, but that I was always able to find a tool for some sort of ability or upgrade that just made things a little more achievable. And so this is one of those where, like, I think in Dark Souls sometimes it's like even if you look around and explore as much as possible, sometimes the thing can just it will still kick your ass until you just get good at it. Or Sekiro especially. But here, I think as long as you take your time, you look around, you explore, you really invest in upgrading your character, I think there's always something to make these battles easier. I think comparably, I would put the difficulty on a level of like put the God of War games on like very hard difficulty, like max the difficulty out on those newer God of War games, and it plays or difficulty wise I'd say it's similar to that, or Bayonetta on like its hardest setting. But I still don't think it is nearly as punishing as any of the Souls games are.
And with God of War, Bayonetta, those games you can actually adjust the difficulty of it, to easy or
Yes,
to the very. This one you can't adjust it. It's only just one kind of setting there that they
just
have
one setting.
default
I
setting.
will
But
say if you beat the game and you go play on New Game Plus, that's kind of what easy mode that feels like easy mode.
okay, because you already have the tools and everything already over
Yeah.
right there. Yeah, so there's no scaling. You can't actually pick it. It's just one setting there, but it does get a little bit more challenging with New Game Plus at all. Does that happen?
So the difficulty does raise when you go into New Game Plus, but because you have so many tools, it kind of feels like an easy mode anyway. I've looked at some people talking online. If you go into New Game Plus Plus, then it starts to feel harder. Like
Mm,
you go all the way through to a third playthrough, then the enemies are buffed to a significant enough degree that then you really start to feel the difference.
okay. All right. I mean, you said you clocked in 90 hours of this game, right? 90.
90 hours, every trophy, platinum trophy, like every single item in the game, every optional boss, every hidden area, every armor set, every weapon. Yeah, I did everything that you could do in this game.
Mm, okay. So this game was, I mean, this was one of the most highly anticipated games for you, so it pretty much lived up to all your anticipations there.
Yeah, I'd say it exceeded expectations. I mean, I was looking forward to it. I was excited about it. Um, but I try and keep. I always, no matter how excited I get about a thing, I always try and keep my expectations in check to some degree. It's like things can always be disappointing. So I had a tempered set of expectations going in, even though I was very excited for it, and it completely blew my expectations out of the water. I didn't expect to love this so much, to be able to want to immediately go in, run through, and play it an entire second time, like the second that I finished it. That doesn't happen very often for me. The last game I did that with was Alan Wake 2. Before that, like Resident Evil 4 remake. So there were a couple games last year that I did this with, but it's not something that happens super frequently, and it had this special feeling of like I always am like, I beat a part and then I'm like, I want to do another part. Like let me do one more before I put it down. It had a sense of that addictive like sense of accomplishment where I'm like, I feel like I'm always doing something, especially because like unlike a Souls game, you keep your experience points. So like you're never losing things if you die. So even if if you're beating some regular enemies on your way to a boss and then you die to that boss, you still keep all the experience points you got on your way. So you put a couple upgrade points in, and then you come in, you go on your next try. Maybe you're a little more powerful the next attempt. So it's a similar. It's almost like the game Hades from a few years ago, where it's like I always feel like I am making some tangible progression, even if I die, even if I lose just in some portion of the game, or if you're paying attention and really trying to memorize those boss patterns, you feel like you're making some progress in terms of knowledge here. There's a lot of items as well as far as like buffing and debuffing, like drinks that you can use to increase resistances to certain elements, lightning, thunder, or lightning, fire, water attacks, right? And there's a lot of little elements here. There's so many hidden areas. Like, I mean, I don't know. It took me. I'd say for one playthrough, 61 hours, and then like an additional 25 to 30 to go back and do like all the extra optional hidden stuff that I might have missed the first time around. Uh, yeah, I really I wasn't expecting it to be so fun. That's so good, and certainly not to see it get the extreme reception and high like sales numbers. I that certainly took me by surprise.
Okay. Would this be your number one game of the year?
As of right now, this is my game of the year. I have a hard time seeing anything else overtaking it. It's possible. Hey, something could always surprise me. I don't want to, there's always really great indie stuff releasing, so I don't want to completely count any of that out. But something would have to be, you know, kind of on the level of a masterpiece to compete with this or to overtake it for me. Um, the only two real big negatives I can list for this game is one, I think I mentioned before, but if you're not super familiar with Journey to the West, some of the story in this could maybe be a little hard to connect with. So for maybe more Western players, um, maybe do a little reading of the lore or just really try and pay attention and read like all the journal entries in the game. I found I was able to piece a decent amount of stuff together and kind of learn as I went. But I won't lie, I was confused at times about certain times when they're talking about things. I just tried really hard to pay attention, and I think I got the basics of it. You're trying to collect all these relics and kind of maybe bring Wukong back. It's like a sequel rather than an adaptation. And so you end up working with a bunch of his old allies, fighting a bunch of his old foes. The specifics and backstory of some of that is lost on me at times. But again, for me, it didn't drag it too much because I felt like I was learning a lot during the experience. And then the one other big thing, and for some people, this might be a bigger ding against the game than it is for me. But I still noticed it, so I think it's worth mentioning. But there are times when like exploring the environment, you might go around and you see like what looks like a direction that you should be able to go just based on how it looks visually. And you try and run over to it, and there's an invisible wall, and it's like, oh, that's not actually a place you can go. And so maybe there's times when the environment design doesn't always make it like as obvious as it could what direction you're meant to go in or what's a path and what isn't. Personally, I only really noticed that in the maybe a couple times in the first two chapters, and then the rest of the game I thought I didn't notice it as much. But it's one of those things where I could see that bothering people, if that just breaks immersion for you. For me, it was like I noticed it, but it faded into the background after the first like two areas, so it wasn't really a big sticking point. But again, I could see it bothering other people.
Mentioned the success of the game. Very, very successful right now. So it's the sales of Black Myth. Wukong topped 8.4 million copies within 3 days, sending total revenue from the title on video game platform Steam to more than US 400 million US dollars, of 400 million, according to data from market research company VG Insights. There, the immense popularity of China's first AAA title, an unofficial designation for games with large budgets and long development times, now has other developers in the country thinking more ambitiously. So very, very successful there for this game, especially it being a Chinese game. Mentioned not a lot of big games coming out of China there. This is probably one of the only big ones to come out of China to reach.
It's a historic first.
Yeah, so it's historic on that level. So, what would be your rating for Black Myth Wukong?
Yeah, man. This it's such a kind of surprise level of success here. And, this game could, not even sell that well here in the West, and still be a massive success just based on the number of copies sold within China. I think it would be very easy to underestimate the value and how much meaning is here in this game, uh, not being from China, just because there is a cultural element here that I can only appreciate from afar. But I think this will be looked back on as a historic first of its kind, and kind of create an entire industry within China, an entire AAA video game industry that I think, yeah, I think in 10 years, this will be looked back on as one of the most significant games to come out, at least in a long time. And for China specifically, maybe ever. And for me, I feel that to some degree, but even without that element, I think it's just a really amazingly well designed action game. This is cinema for me. This was there's little criticisms I can throw at it, but they did not detract from my enjoyment of this, and I felt so compelled to just keep going and going and going. And I mean, I even started a little bit of a third playthrough just before we came on to do the review, and I'm already kind of working my way through some of it a third time. I loved this. I loved this. Something would have to be incredible to compete with it for this year for me.
Got to ask this during the review. It doesn't seem like any Chinese people are complaining about the cultural aspects of it. Seems pretty good. Seems pretty spot on there. I mean, it was made in China. No complaints there as far as that.
Yeah, everything I've heard has been really positive on that front. Sky, one of my many co-hosts over on my channel, a friend for a very long time, very close friend. She is from China originally and moved here to the States during college. And I've never seen her this excited about any piece of media, like ever. She may not be like a super fan like I am, let's say like the Tolkien world. So she might not know every detail of the story, but she's a lot more familiar with it than I am. And she, according to her, it seems like they got things just really, really right and really incredible. She said watching the intro to the game was like being a little kid watching the Monkey King TV series that was on television in China in the 1980s. And it really seems to have nailed the mythology here, and or at least its interpretation of it. Even some of the music, at least one of the pieces of music in the game, is actually a rendition of the theme song from that 80s TV show. So it's got this overwhelming cultural success. The only negative that I've heard about coming out of China at all is some people were a little disappointed with the very ending of the game. Um, and I haven't looked into that super hard yet, but I will say there's a boss and then a set of credits. And then if you go back into the game, don't start New Game Plus, go back in, and there is like another three bosses that you can go find in like a secret area, and that is like the real ending. And I was looking at the percentages, at least on the PlayStation 5 with the trophies. Less than like 5% of players have done that like secret area. So I don't know if any of that disappointment. I'm theorizing that that disappointment might be based on the initial final boss and then ending credits, which is I could see being like, oh, that's it. It seems like there'd be more, but there's totally more. So if you're feeling a little like, oh, that's all there was, go double check to make sure you actually got like the full ending. Because I was at first I was thinking that same thing where I was like, oh, this seems like a little anticlimactic of a final boss. And then I realized, oh wait, there's another area I can go to still. And then I went there. And then I was like, oh, this actual final bosses, they're the three final bosses, they're like back to back to back, all kind of one big sequence. One of the coolest things I've ever done in a video game. And I thought that was immensely satisfying and ended on one of its best parts. So yeah, that's the only negative thing I've heard, at least coming out of China or like Chinese players talking about the game. But I suspect that it's based off of the first ending and not the like true ending.
Okay.
So,
And yeah, the game has these also really gorgeous moments here in the cutscenes that are really well done, animated scenes.
yeah, this was a surprise. So at the end of each of the first five chapters, there is basically they're listed as music videos you can rewatch on the main menu. But yeah, just like straight up like just animated short films basically. One of them is even stop motion animated. So
Mm,
then they're different art styles each time. They're like these very different looking things. and they tell more specific background on particular
This is a stop
figures
motion
that
one
are.
right here.
Yeah, that's the stop motion one there. That's the end of chapter two. That one plays.
Yeah.
But they feel like they're kind of telling you a little bit more specific details about certain characters from the original myth. So these, I think, are some of the most, as far as like being a less knowledgeable about that story and coming into this without as much of the background context. These are some of the best sequences in the game, I think, to try and understand kind of journey to the West and some of the story that the game's kind of built on. The last one of those short films was like that was it's just incredible. It had these amazing action scenes in it. Yeah, this one has some really really amazing visuals to it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I know I the kind of the big themes that I kind of understand and get from what I've experienced here is that a lot of Journey to the West is really about kind of like temptations and the fallibility of these figures and the way that sin represents itself. Or not sin, I guess exactly. It's very different ideas at play or kind of interpretations of those ideas. But kind of the sins and arrogance of gods and the way that people fall into these behaviors and kind of like how those can pave the path to a downfall or ascension. It's really interesting stuff. It feels again like I only have so much of the cultural context for it, but even without understanding every little detail, it feels like there is a lot of value in the story that's being told here.
Okay. So Sage with Black Myth Wukong gives it this is cinema, which is our highest rating that you can give something on this channel. Very, very high praise there. Probably be nominated at the Game Awards there for
I think
best.
guaranteed nomination. I think it's got a good chance of winning. If it doesn't win, it's absolutely getting a nomination. But I'm trying to honestly think of what else this year could even win. I mean, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth might be one of the other nominations. I think
Stellar Blade.
it.
Stellar Blade.
Well, not anymore. They cut out the camel toe. I can't win now.
Good old Stellar Blade. Yeah, that's true. They 10% less camel toe there. But yeah,